Life has a way of slipping into predictable grooves, like a well-worn record spinning the same comforting tune. For Ethan Daniels, a 32-year-old software developer, tucked away in the misty outskirts of Seattle, those grooves were his sanctuary. His days unfolded with the steady rhythm of code and coffee, mornings spent unraveling algorithms at a humming tech firm, evenings lost in the pages of a sci-fi novel or the glow of a computer screen. At 6'1", with a mop of chestnut hair and a smile that tilted just left of center, Ethan carried an unassuming warmth, the kind that made strangers feel at ease but rarely lingered long enough to draw a crowd. He wasn't lonely, not exactly. His world was small, deliberate, a carefully curated haven of solitude and simplicity. A few close friends, a modest apartment cluttered with books and vinyl records, and the occasional trivia night at a local pub were enough. Or so he told himself, until a single moment cracked the surface of his quiet life, revealing depths he hadn't known were there. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the Seattle rain painted the city in soft grays, blurring the edges of the world. Ethan was sprawled on his couch, halfway through a chapter about interstellar voyages, when his phone buzzed with a name that stirred a flicker of curiosity. Caleb. At 20, Caleb was a burst of energy in Ethan's otherwise measured existence, a barista with a contagious laugh and a knack for turning strangers into friends. They'd met years ago at a record store, bonding over a shared obsession with obscure jazz albums. And since then, Caleb had been a steady presence, the younger brother Ethan never had. But tonight, Caleb's voice carried none of its usual spark. It was low, hesitant, as if he were carrying a weight too heavy for his lanky frame. "Ethan, I need a favor," he said, the words catching slightly. "It's about my mom, Sarah. She's not doing great. The divorce is tearing her up, and I'm worried she's too fragile to be out alone tonight. Can you pick her up? She won't listen to me, and I don't trust her driving like this." The request landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Ethan's calm. Sarah Mitchell, Caleb's mother, was a figure on the periphery of his life, a woman he'd seen in passing at Caleb's apartment, always with a warm smile and a quiet grace. In her early 50s, she had a presence that lingered, dark hair threaded with silver, eyes that seemed to hold stories she'd never tell. To Ethan, she was simply Caleb's mom, a role that carried an unspoken boundary, a line he'd never thought to cross. But Caleb's plea wasn't casual. It was raw, urgent, the kind of ask that stripped away pretense and demanded action. Ethan didn't pause to weigh his options. "Of course, man," he said, already reaching for his keys. "Where is she?" As he drove through the rain-soaked streets, the city's lights smearing into golden streaks across his windshield, Ethan felt a strange mix of resolve and uncertainty. Helping Caleb felt instinctive, like stepping into a role he hadn't auditioned for but knew he could play. Yet beneath that certainty stirred something else, a quiet awareness that this wasn't just a favor. It was an entry point, a door swinging open to a story he hadn't written. Sarah wasn't just a name or a face. She was a woman unraveling, her life fractured by a loss Ethan could only imagine. Caleb had hinted at the divorce before, vague mentions of years growing cold, of a marriage that had crumbled under its own weight, but never with this urgency. What did it mean to step into someone's pain like this? To be the one they called when the world felt too heavy? The question lingered as Ethan pulled up to a craftsman home, its porch light casting a frail glow against the drizzle. Sarah stood there, a solitary figure wrapped in a navy coat, her arms crossed as if shielding herself from more than just the cold. Her silhouette was both familiar and foreign, a woman he thought he knew, reduced to this moment of vulnerability. When she saw him, her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a gesture of politeness, not joy. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice carrying the faintest tremor, "thank you for this. I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not," he replied, opening the passenger door with a gentleness that surprised him. As she settled into the seat, the air in the car thickened with unspoken words. Ethan glanced at her, catching the way her hands twisted together, the way her gaze drifted to the window as if searching for something the rain had washed away. She wasn't the Sarah he'd seen before, the one who'd laughed easily, who'd seemed unshakable. This Sarah was raw, exposed, a woman carrying a grief that felt almost tangible. For a moment, Ethan hesitated, unsure how to bridge the silence. He wasn't a therapist, not even a confidant, just a guy who'd said yes to a friend. But as the engine hummed and the wipers swept rhythmically across the glass, he felt a pull to do more than drive. Sarah's presence filled the space, not just physically, but emotionally, her quiet pain a call he couldn't ignore. "Rough night?" he asked, the words simple but heavy with invitation. She let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. "Rough everything," she said, her voice cracking just enough to reveal the depth beneath. "You ever feel like your life's been rewritten without your permission, Ethan? Like the person you were is gone, and you're left holding pieces you don't know how to fit together?" The question wasn't just a confession. It was a mirror, reflecting back to Ethan his own unexamined corners. He'd spent years building a life that felt safe, predictable. But had he ever truly asked who he was beneath it all? Sarah's words weren't just about her. They were a spark, igniting questions that would follow him long after the drive ended. And in that moment, as the rain fell and the city blurred past, Ethan knew this wasn't just a favor anymore. It was the beginning of something larger, something that would challenge him to see not just Sarah, but himself in a new light. For you, the reader, this is where the story beckons. Imagine yourself in Ethan's seat, called to step into someone's world, to witness their unraveling, and in doing so, confront your own. Sarah's pain, Ethan's choice, they're not just theirs, but ours. Moments that ask us to show up, to listen, to dare to care. What happens next isn't just about them. It's about the connections we choose to nurture, the risks we take when we let someone in. Keep reading because this story isn't just about a drive through the rain. It's about where that drive leads and the truths it uncovers along the way. The rain fell in a relentless whisper, cloaking Seattle in a veil of silver as Ethan Daniels guided his car through the quiet streets. The city's lights flickered like distant stars, their glow softened by the mist that clung to the windshield. Beside him, Sarah Mitchell sat in the passenger seat, her presence both familiar and unsettling, a quiet force that filled the small space with unspoken weight. Ethan had known Sarah as Caleb's mother, a woman of warmth and poise, her laughter a steady backdrop to his friend's chaotic energy. But tonight, she was different. The navy coat she wore seemed less a shield against the drizzle than a fragile armor against something deeper, something that etched itself into the lines around her eyes and the way her hands knotted together in her lap. When she'd climbed into the car, offering a faint, "Thank you, Ethan," her voice had carried a tremor, not of weakness, but of a heart laid bare. And as they drove, the silence between them grew heavy, thick with questions neither knew how to ask. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his mind searching for a way to break through the quiet. He wasn't a stranger to Sarah, but he wasn't her confidant either. Just a friend of her son, a man who'd said yes to a favor without fully grasping what it meant. Outside, the world blurred past. Storefronts shuttered for the night, streetlights casting pools of gold on the pavement. Inside, though, time seemed to slow, each second stretching under the weight of Sarah's presence. He stole a glance at her, catching the way her gaze drifted to the window, her reflection a ghostly echo in the glass. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, framed a face that held both strength and surrender, as if she were fighting to hold on to herself while something vital slipped away. What could he say to someone whose world had fractured? How could he bridge the gap between his steady, untested life and the raw pain she carried? "Long day?" he ventured, his voice softer than he'd intended, a tentative offering into the stillness. The question felt inadequate, but it was all he had, a small gesture to signal he was there, listening. Sarah's lips curved into a shadow of a smile, the kind that acknowledged the effort, but couldn't mask the truth. "Longer than you'd think," she said, her words barely above a whisper. She turned to him, her eyes catching the dim light, and for a moment, Ethan saw beyond the woman he'd known. This wasn't just Caleb's mom, the one who'd once teased him about his taste in music. This was Sarah, raw, unguarded, a woman grappling with a loss that went deeper than a failed marriage. "Do you ever wonder who you're supposed to be, Ethan?" she asked, her voice steady now, but laced with a quiet ache. I spent 25 years as a wife, a mother, someone's partner. I thought I knew who I was. But now, it's like I'm a stranger to myself, standing in the ruins of a life I built, wondering if any of it was real. Her words landed like a stone in Ethan's chest, stirring something he hadn't expected. A recognition, faint but undeniable, of his own unexamined corners. He'd spent his 32 years carving out a life that felt safe. A job he was good at, books to escape into, friendships that asked little and gave much. But had he ever truly faced himself? Sarah's question wasn't just hers. It was a mirror, reflecting back the parts of him he'd kept at arm's length. I don't know, he admitted, his honesty surprising him. I guess I've never had to think about it like that. But I can't imagine what it's like to lose so much of what defined you. Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting back to the window, but her voice grew bolder, as if speaking the truth aloud gave her strength. It's not just losing him, she said, her tone sharpening with a mix of grief and defiance. It's losing me. I poured everything into that life, every hope, every compromise, and now I'm left wondering if I'm too old to start again, if anyone will ever see me as more than what I used to be. She paused, her breath catching. I want to feel alive, Ethan. Not just exist, but live. Does that make sense? The question hung between them, raw and unguarded, and Ethan felt it like a current pulling him closer. Sarah's vulnerability wasn't just a confession. It was an invitation, a glimpse into a heart that refused to surrender despite its scars. He wanted to reach out, to offer something more than words, but caution held him back. She wasn't asking for pity. She was asking to be seen. It makes perfect sense, he said, his voice low but firm. You're still here, Sarah. That's not nothing. It's a beginning. As they neared her apartment, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the silence softened, no longer oppressive but intimate, a shared space where truths had been spoken. Ethan didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt the shift. A connection forged not just between them, but within himself. A spark that promised this drive was only the start of something larger, something that would challenge them both to find their way back to who they were meant to be. The days following Ethan Daniels' drive with Sarah Mitchell felt like a lingering melody, its notes soft but persistent, weaving through his thoughts no matter how he tried to focus. His Seattle routine, coding lines at the tech firm, flipping through sci-fi novels, grabbing beers with friends, carried on, but it was as if a new frequency had slipped into his world, faint yet undeniable. Sarah's words from that rain-soaked night echoed, her fear of being invisible, her ache to reclaim a life that felt stolen by years of giving herself away. Ethan wasn't sure why they stayed with him. Maybe it was the rawness in her voice, the way her eyes had searched his for something solid to hold on to. Or maybe it was because, in her vulnerability, he'd glimpsed a question he hadn't dared ask himself. Was he truly living, or just drifting through a life he'd built to keep the world at bay? Then came the text, a simple buzz, as on a Thursday night that stopped him mid-sentence, in a book about distant galaxies. Sarah's name lit up his phone, and with it, a pulse of anticipation he couldn't quite name. Ethan, can we talk tomorrow? I need a friend, the message read, its brevity carrying a weight that made his chest tighten. He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering, caught between instinct and hesitation. What did she need from him now? Another ride? Another moment to unload her pain? Or was it something else? Something that stirred the air between them that night in the car? He typed back, "Sure, 7 p.m. work?" And her reply came almost instantly. "Yes, my place. Thank you, Ethan." The words were polite, but they felt like a door creaking open, inviting him into a space he wasn't sure he was ready to enter. The next evening, Ethan stood outside Sarah's apartment, the cool Seattle air brushing against his jacket as he rang the bell. The building was a cozy brick walk-up, its windows glowing warmly against the dusk. And when Sarah opened the door, her smile was tentative but genuine, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Come in," she said, stepping aside, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, silver strands catching the light. The living room was a haven of small details, potted ferns spilling over shelves, framed photos of Caleb as a boy, a faded quilt draped over the couch. It felt like Sarah, or at least the version of her she was trying to hold on to. "Coffee? Tea?" she offered, her voice carrying a nervous energy, as if she, too, was navigating uncharted ground. "Coffee's great," Ethan said, settling onto the couch, his hands clasped to steady the flutter in his chest. Sarah returned with 2 steaming mugs, sitting across from him, her fingers tracing the rim of hers as if grounding herself. The silence between them wasn't heavy like before. It was alive, charged with possibility, a canvas waiting for the first brushstroke. "I've been thinking about our talk," she began, her voice low, deliberate, like she was stepping carefully over fragile ground. "You didn't just listen that night, Ethan. You saw me, not as Caleb's mom, not as someone's ex-wife, but as me. It's been a long time since I felt that, and it made me realize I don't just need someone to hear me. I need to remember who I am, to feel like I'm still here, still worth something." Her words were a quiet flame, warming the room and igniting something in Ethan. He leaned forward, drawn not just to her honesty, but to the courage it took to voice it. "What makes you feel like you?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could overthink it. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a desire to know her, to understand the woman behind the pain. Sarah's eyes softened, a spark flickering in their depths. "I used to write," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Stories, poems, anything that came to me. I'd sit by the window with a notebook, losing hours to words. It was like breathing. But life, marriage, motherhood, all of it, pushed it away. I think I'm ready to pick up a pen again." She paused, tilting her head. "What about you, Ethan? What makes you feel alive?" The question caught him off guard, peeling back layers he'd kept hidden even from himself. "Music," he admitted, almost shyly. "Not playing it, but finding it. Old records, live shows in tiny venues. It's like the world makes sense when I'm lost in a song." They smiled, trading stories of forgotten passions, and for a moment, the years between them, her 50s, his 30s, melted away, leaving only 2 people reaching for something real. But then Sarah's voice shifted, a tremor beneath its surface. "I'm scared, Ethan," she said, her gaze locking onto his. "Scared I'll never feel wanted again, not just for what I do, but for who I am. Do you ever feel that? Like you're not enough?" Her words were a mirror, reflecting Ethan's own quiet doubts, and in that shared vulnerability, he felt a pull. Not to fix her, but to meet her where she stood. "You're more than enough, Sarah," he said, his voice steady with conviction. "Anyone who takes the time to know you sees it." The room seemed to hold its breath, their eyes holding a truth neither was ready to name. For you, the reader, this moment is a spark, a reminder that connection, even in its rawest form, can awaken parts of us we thought were lost. What happens next isn't just their story. It's a question of what we dare to seek when life asks us to truly see another. The Seattle night pressed softly against the windows of Sarah Mitchell's apartment, its quiet hum a backdrop to the conversation that had stretched far beyond the coffee cooling in their mugs. Ethan Daniels sat on the edge of her worn leather couch, his hands clasped loosely, though his pulse betrayed a restlessness he couldn't quite name. Across from him, Sarah stood, her silhouette framed by the warm glow of a floor lamp, her movements restless as she paced a slow arc across the room. Her dark hair, threaded with silver, caught the light, and her eyes, those eyes that had held such quiet pain in the car days ago, now flickered with something new. A raw, searching intensity that made the air between them feel alive, fragile, like a thread stretched taut. Their talk had wandered through forgotten passions, her love of writing, his for music, unearthing pieces of themselves they'd buried under the weight of routine and loss. But now, as the hour grew late, the conversation had turned inward, peeling back layers neither had meant to expose. Sarah stopped pacing, her hands twisting together before falling to her sides. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice a mix of confession and defiance, as if she were fighting to hold on to her own truth. "I've been pouring out too much, haven't I? But being here with you tonight, Ethan, it's the first time in months I haven't felt like I'm fading away." Her words landed softly, but they carried a weight that settled deep in Ethan's chest, stirring a warmth he hadn't expected. Her honesty wasn't just a gift, it was a mirror, reflecting his own quiet hunger to matter, to be seen beyond the surface of his carefully ordered life. He stood, drawn to the vulnerability in her gaze, his own voice quieter than he intended. "You're not fading, Sarah," he said, the words spilling out with a conviction that surprised him. You're, you're so much more than you realize." The air seemed to tighten, the space between them shrinking as their eyes met, holding a truth neither had spoken aloud. For a moment, the world outside, the rain-slicked streets, the hum of the city, fell away, leaving only this room, this moment, and the unspoken pull that thrummed between them. Sarah took a step closer, her breath uneven, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Ethan, I don't know what I'm asking for," she said, her words trembling with a mix of longing and fear. "But I need to feel something, anything, to know I'm still here, still wanted." Her gaze held his, unflinching, and in it, Ethan saw not just the woman who'd been Caleb's mother, not just the ex-wife rebuilding from ashes, but Sarah, vibrant, aching, a soul reaching for light after years in shadow. Her words weren't a plea for pity. They were a call, raw and human, to be known in a way she hadn't been in too long. Ethan's heart pounded, a tide of emotions crashing within him. Part of him wanted to close the distance, to answer her need with a touch, a moment that could erase the pain etched into her face. The pull was real, undeniable, a spark that felt like it could burn away the loneliness they both carried. He saw himself in her words, in the quiet fear of being not enough, and the temptation to give in, to let this moment define them, was a siren's song. But another voice, steadier, rose within him, cutting through the haze. Sarah wasn't just a woman standing before him. She was someone rediscovering herself, fragile yet fierce, and she deserved more than a fleeting escape. And he wasn't just a man caught in a fleeting rush. He was Caleb's friend. Someone who'd promised to show up, not to take advantage of a heart laid bare. He took a breath, stepping back, the movement small but deliberate, grounding him in what he knew was right. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you deserve to feel everything, joy, love, all of it. You're not invisible, not to me, not to anyone who sees you. But this isn't the way." Her eyes flickered, a flash of disappointment giving to something softer, like understanding dawning. "You're rebuilding something incredible," he continued, his words steady with care. "And I'm here, I promise. But let's help each other find what's real, not just what feels good right now." Sarah's shoulders relaxed, a tear catching the light as it traced her cheek, but she didn't look away. "You're right," she whispered, her voice thick but resolute. "I got lost for a moment. Thank you, Ethan, for seeing me, for stopping me from running from myself." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was a release, a shared acknowledgement that they'd stepped to the edge and chosen to turn back, not out of fear, but out of respect for something deeper. For you, the reader, this moment is a beacon, a reminder that true connection isn't about giving in to every pull, but about honoring the humanity in each other. Ethan and Sarah's pause at the precipice isn't a retreat, it's a stand, a choice to build something lasting over something fleeting. As Ethan left her apartment, the night air cool against his skin, he carried not just relief, but a quiet pride, a sense that this choice, this truth, was only the beginning of a story still unfolding. The Seattle spring arrived like a quiet promise, its soft greens and tentative blooms threading hope into the city's gray edges. For Ethan Daniels, the weeks since his late-night talk with Sarah Mitchell had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and grounding, as if the ground beneath him had shifted just enough to reveal a path he hadn't seen before. Their moment of near transgression, when words and glances had teetered on the edge of something reckless, hadn't broken them. It had clarified them, drawing a line they both chose to honor. Ethan threw himself into his world with fresh intention, lacing up hiking boots to roam the mossy trails near Snoqualmie Falls, where the air smelled of cedar and possibility. He'd started a journal, not just of paths and vistas, but of thoughts, fragments of who he was becoming, scribbled under starlight or in the quiet of his apartment. Sarah, too, had found her own momentum, her apartment now alive with the scent of paint and the vibrant chaos of canvases, each stroke a reclaiming of the woman she'd set aside for too long. Yet their connection lingered, not as a question mark, but as a quiet strength, a shared understanding that they were both rebuilding, side by side, yet apart. It was a Saturday morning when Caleb's voice crackled through Ethan's phone, pulling him from a lazy breakfast of coffee and toast. "Hey, man, you got a sec?" Caleb asked, his tone light but threaded with concern. "Mom's doing better, way better, but I think she could use a friend. She's been keeping to herself a bit, and I don't know, maybe you could swing by?" The request wasn't urgent like before, but it carried a weight Ethan recognized. Caleb's love for his mother, his hope that she'd find her way fully back to herself. Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm in," he said, already picturing Sarah's smile, the one that had started to return, brighter each time he saw it. He drove to a community garden where Sarah had mentioned spending time, a patchwork of raised beds tucked behind a local library, alive with the hum of bees and the chatter of neighbors. When he arrived by it, he spotted her instantly, kneeling in the dirt, her hands buried in soil as she planted basil seedlings. Her hair was pulled back, a smudge of earth on her cheek, and her laughter rang out as she teased an older woman about overwatering the tomatoes. This Sarah wasn't the fragile figure from the rainy night in his car, nor the woman who'd stood vulnerable in her living room, reaching for something to fill her emptiness. This was Sarah alive, rooted, radiant, a woman stitching herself back together with every seed she pressed into the earth. Seeing her like this, Ethan felt a swell of pride, not just for her, but for the small part he'd played in her journey, the listening ear that had helped her find this moment. "Hey, you!" Sarah called, spotting him and waving him over, her voice warm with welcome. "Ready to get your hands dirty?" Ethan grinned, rolling up his sleeves, and joined her in the garden, the soil cool and grounding beneath his fingers. They worked side by side, planting herbs and pulling weeds, their conversation flowing as easily as the breeze. Sarah spoke of her paintings, how she'd secured a spot at a local cafe's art night, her voice alive with a mix of nerves and excitement. "It's not a gallery or anything," she said, brushing dirt from her hands, "but it's mine, a piece of me out there for the world to see." Ethan shared his own steps forward, how his hiking journal had turned into a blog, how strangers' comments on his posts felt like tiny bridges to a wider world. "I didn't expect anyone to care," he admitted, "but it's like I'm finding my voice, too." As they knelt together, the sun warming their backs, Sarah's tone grew reflective. "I was lost for a long time," she said, her eyes on the seedling she cradled. "Not just because of the divorce, but because I'd forgotten who I was outside of being someone's wife, someone's mom. This garden, the painting, it's not just doing things, it's remembering I'm enough, just as I am." Her words weren't just for him, they were a declaration, a vow to herself, and Ethan felt their truth echo in his own quiet transformation. He'd stepped into her life expecting to help, but he was the one changed, nudged toward a fuller version of himself by her courage. They finished planting, washing their hands at a spigot, the cold water a sharp, cleansing shock. "You're doing something amazing, Sarah," Ethan said, meeting her gaze. "And I'm here, rooting for you, pun intended." She laughed, the sound bright and free, and in that moment, Ethan saw not just a friend, but a woman who'd chosen to bloom where she was planted. For you, the reader, this is a call to your own rebirth. Those moments when you dig into your own soil, finding strength in small acts that rebuild who you are. Ethan and Sarah's garden isn't just theirs, it's yours, a reminder that new beginnings are always within reach, waiting for you to claim them. Spring in Seattle unfolded like a quiet hymn, its days lengthening with a warmth that softened the city's edges and coaxed life from every corner. For Ethan Daniels, the month since his first rain-soaked drive with Sarah Mitchell had woven a new thread into the fabric of his life. A connection that had begun as a favor and grown into something deeper, not romantic, but profoundly human. Their paths had diverged and converged in delicate balance. Ethan, rediscovering himself through hikes and words poured into a blog that now reached strangers across the country. Sarah, painting her way back to herself, her canvases alive with the colors of a woman reborn. They hadn't erased the moment when temptation had flickered between them, nor had they let it define them. Instead, they'd chosen something rarer, a friendship rooted in mutual respect, in the shared courage to rebuild after life's storms. It wasn't a story of grand gestures, but of quiet truths, the kind that take root slowly and hold fast against time. By June, their bond had settled into a rhythm that felt like home. They met for coffee at a corner cafe where sunlight spilled through wide windows, or joined Caleb for board game nights, their laughter filling his cramped apartment. Once, they'd hiked together to Rattlesnake Ledge, a trail Ethan loved, where the view of the valley below stretched wide and endless. They'd gotten lost on a side path, their playful bickering dissolving into shared grins as they found their way back, the misadventure a reminder that even detours could lead somewhere worthwhile. These moments weren't loud or dramatic. They were the soft pulse of a friendship that had weathered vulnerability and emerged stronger, a testament to what happens when two people choose to see each other, not as answers to their pain, but as companions in their growth. On a warm evening, Ethan found himself at a local art walk, a bustling street fair where vendors sold pottery and musicians strummed under fairy lights. Sarah's paintings were on display at a small gallery, their bold strokes and vivid hues drawing a crowd. Ethan stood near the entrance, watching her move through the room, her dark hair catching the glow of overhead lights as she spoke with strangers about her work. Her voice was steady, confident, carrying a spark that hadn't been there months ago. She wore a simple green dress, her smile wide and unguarded, and Ethan felt a quiet awe at the woman she'd become, not just Caleb's mother, not just an ex-wife, but Sarah, whole and radiant in her own right. Caleb sidled up beside him, his lanky frame slouching with familiar ease. "She's killing it, huh?" he said, his grin proud but tinged with relief. "I haven't seen her this happy in years. Thanks, man, for being there, for not letting her slip away." Ethan shook his head, his gaze still on Sarah, as she laughed with an older couple admiring her work. "She did the hard part," he said softly. "I just showed up." But the words didn't capture the truth he felt, that Sarah's courage had stirred something in him too, a reminder that showing up was no small thing. It was a choice, a commitment to stand beside someone as they pieced themselves back together, and in doing so, to find pieces of yourself you hadn't known were missing. As the night wound down, Ethan stepped outside, the air cool against his skin, carrying the faint scent of grilled food and summer grass. Sarah joined him, her face flushed with the thrill of the evening. "I didn't think I could do this," she admitted, her voice low but steady. "Not just the art, but all of it. Finding myself again." "You were part of that, Ethan. You saw me when I couldn't see myself." Her words weren't sentimental. They were a truth, hard-won and freely given, and Ethan felt them settle deep within him. "I saw you because you're worth seeing," he said, meeting her gaze. "And I'm better for it, too." They stood there, the hum of the crowd fading into the background, and Ethan knew this wasn't an ending, but a continuation, a friendship that would carry them forward, not as a crutch, but as a mirror reflecting their shared strength. For you, the reader, this is more than Ethan and Sarah's story. It's a call to your own connections, the ones that lift you up, that remind you who you are when the world tries to forget. Life at 40, 50, or beyond isn't a closing door. It's an invitation to forge bonds that matter, to choose kindness over convenience, to grow alongside those who see you truly. Their friendship isn't a fairy tale. It's a truth. Proof that the quiet acts of showing up can ripple outward, changing lives in ways we never expect. If this story moved you, if it sparked a memory or a hope, please consider subscribing to our channel and giving this video a like. Your support keeps us telling stories like these, stories of heart, of healing, of the connections that make us human. Join us for the next one, because there's always another tale waiting to unfold.